Last night, my son texted, "Don't come to the warehouse this weekend. Stay home." By dawn, he called back, his voice unsteady. "Daniel, there's a safety report with your signature, a contract with your name on it. What did you do I didn't plead or explain?" I opened my old laptop and understood one thing: if they were forging a story to erase me. I was about to file the truth. The town I live in doesn't make the news unless a semi flips on the highway or the wind knocks a roof clean off a gas station. It's western sun, pale dust, and a long ribbon of asphalt that never really sleeps. Trucks roll through before dawn. Forklifts beep behind chain-link fences. Everyone here measures time by arrivals and departures, not holidays. My place sits a few miles outside the main road, a tired little ranch house that was already old when I bought it. Out back is what matters. A warehouse I rebuilt with my own hands. Not pretty, not Instagram. Corrugated metal, patched siding, a roll-up door that groans like an old man standing up. Inside, it smells like oil, cardboard, and hot wiring. That's where I spend most mornings. At 6:12 a.m., I'm usually at the workbench with a mug that's gone cold, a pencil behind my ear, and a clipboard I keep pretending I don't need. Sensors line the shelves. Spare parts sit in labeled bins. Notebooks stack up like bricks. When something breaks, I don't panic. I trace it. I test it. I write it down. I used to move fast. Now my body moves like it's walking through sand. The doctor called it a neurological condition. No dramatic speeches, no movie music, just a quiet list of symptoms and a warning that things might get inconvenient. The inconvenient part isn't pain. It's timing. My hand trembles at the wrong moment. My fingers miss a screw by an inch. My steps take an extra second to start. People notice the delay and start filling it with their own stories. They look at the shaking and assume the thinking is gone. It isn't. My mind still runs clean and sharp. If a conveyor motor pulls too many amps, I hear it before the meter confirms it. If a pallet's weight shifts wrong, I predict the jam before it happens. I see patterns in messy numbers the way some people see faces in a crowd. The irony is simple. My body slowed down, and my brain got louder. That contrast makes people uncomfortable, especially family. My wife used to ask how my day went. She used to stand in the doorway of the warehouse, watching me work like it mattered. Then the tremors became the tremors, like a third person living with us. Conversations shortened. Every sentence needed a safety label, Lucas started saying. "Let me handle that," before I finished reaching for the keys. Evelyn rearranged my medication like I was a child. When I pushed back, when I asked for a moment to do it myself, they didn't hear a man protecting his dignity. They heard a problem resisting management. Here's the part nobody says out loud. Most people don't fear illness. They fear the inconvenience it brings. A slower walk, a dropped glass, an awkward pause. It isn't cruelty at first. It's impatience wearing a polite mask. They tell themselves a better story. We're just helping. We're just being careful. We're just planning ahead. But the line between planning and taking over is thin. It starts with little notes. A reminder on the fridge, a text asking if you locked the door, a habit of documenting instead of asking, a family conversation that happens without you because it's easier. The sick person stops being someone to listen to and becomes a risk to manage. That's how you get erased without anyone raising their voice. In this town, efficiency is a religion. If you can't keep up, someone replaces you. That logic makes sense on a loading dock. It does not belong inside a home, but it sneaks in anyway. People bring workplace language to the dinner table. Liability, exposure, safety. One day you're a husband and a father, the next day you're a file. So when my son called that morning, breathless, talking about contracts and safety reports with my name on them, it didn't feel sudden. It felt like the final step of something forming for months. Not because they hated me, because they decided I was inconvenient. And once someone decides that, They stop listening to your words. They start listening for permission to move you out of the way. I didn't know it yet, but that decision was reshaping my future. It started with small things, the kind you don't argue about because they sound reasonable. A note on the counter. Door left unlocked again. A message forwarded to me instead of spoken. Delivery time confused this morning. Once, I dropped a wrench. It clanged against the concrete and rolled under a pallet. Lucas picked it up before I could bend down. He didn't hand it back. He set it on a shelf and said, "I've got it. I didn't think much of it." At first, the first report showed up on a Tuesday afternoon. I recognized the template immediately. White background, company header, bullet points. The kind of document people trust because it looks calm. Maintenance and safety report, subject routine observation. It listed 3 items. Unsecured access point, delayed response during loading window, dropped tool near active equipment. Each one was technically true. Each one was missing context. The door had been unlocked for less than 2 minutes while I moved a pallet jack. The delay came from a rerouted truck I had already flagged. The dropped tool happened after my hand shook when a forklift horn blasted behind me. None of that made it into the report. What did make it in were words like risk, pattern, and concern, not accusations, assessments. By Friday, there were 2 more. Different days, same tone, objective, clean, detached. Evelyn stopped asking how things went at the warehouse. She started asking if anything needed to be noted. Lucas asked for copies of my logs just to keep everything aligned. When I questioned it, he smiled and said, "It's not a big deal. Dad, this is just documentation." That's when I understood something most people don't see until it's too late. Power doesn't always show up angry. Sometimes it shows up organized. The reports weren't there to help me. They were there to define me, to turn moments into patterns and patterns into a narrative I didn't get to write. This is how control changes hands without anyone raising their voice. In modern families, harm rarely looks like shouting or slammed doors. It looks like clipboards. It looks like concern written in formal language. It looks like someone else deciding what counts as normal. Psychologists call it cognitive abuse. I call it being managed out of your own life. No one tells you you're wrong. They just record. No one tells you you're incapable. They just suggest supervision. And the moment you push back, the notes get thicker. If you've never experienced it, it sounds dramatic. If you have, you know how quiet it is. The most dangerous part isn't the paperwork. It's what it does to your head. You start replaying moments. Did I really leave the door open? Was I slower than usual? Did I overreact? That hesitation is the handoff. The second you begin questioning your own memory, someone else steps in to define reality for you. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I started paying attention. I noticed the reports never included timestamps from the sensor logs I maintained. I noticed they didn't mention the maintenance alerts I resolved before failures occurred. I noticed how every document pointed in one direction, gently, consistently, toward oversight, toward restriction, toward removal. This wasn't fear anymore. It was preparation. I stood in the warehouse one evening after sunset, the lights humming overhead, my boots dusted white from the floor. I flipped through the reports one by one. Same language, same formatting, same conclusion, implied but never stated. I was becoming a liability on paper. And paper, I knew, was harder to argue with than people. That's when the question changed. Not, why are they doing this, but what are they building next? Because documentation is never the end. It's the foundation. And once someone lays it carefully enough, they don't need to push you out. They can point to the stack and say you stepped aside on your own. I closed the binder and set it back on the shelf. They were writing their version of me, so I started writing mine. They didn't push me out all at once. They just stopped making space. Dinner used to happen at 6. Same table, same seats. One night I came in from the warehouse at 6:18, boots still dusty, and the plates were already stacked in the sink. Evelyn said, "We didn't want to wait and stress you out." She said it like a favor. The next week, I noticed my name wasn't on the shared calendar anymore. Not crossed out, just gone. Meetings still happened. Decisions still got made. I found out afterward, usually by accident, usually too late to change anything. It wasn't anger, it was efficiency. One evening I walked through the living room and stopped in front of the wall. There was a framed photo there, a family picture from last spring. I remembered the day. Windy. Someone had complained about the light. I was sure I'd been standing on the left side. In the frame. I wasn't. The crop was clean. Professional. Like I'd never been there to begin with. No one mentioned it. No apology, no explanation. The picture looked balanced now, less cluttered, easier on the eyes. That's when it hit me. They didn't need me gone. They just needed me quiet. Families don't always erase you with cruelty. Sometimes they do it with comfort. They decide your presence complicates things. You ask too many questions. You slow the pace. You make people uncomfortable by existing slightly out of sync. So they soften the edges. Let's keep things simple. Let's not make this a whole thing. Let's just get through today. You're still invited. Technically. Just not needed. The most painful part isn't being disliked. It's being downgraded to background noise. A chair that stays empty without anyone noticing. A voice people talk over because it takes an extra second to come out. And every time I chose not to argue, it worked against me. Silence looks like agreement when someone else is writing the minutes. I learned that the hard way. When I didn't comment on the change schedule, it became proof I didn't care. When I didn't push back on the reports, it became proof I accepted their assessment. When I stayed quiet to keep the peace, it became evidence that I had nothing to say. This is how exclusion disguises itself as harmony. No shouting, no ultimatums, just fewer invitations and softer language. We're doing this for your sake. We don't want to overwhelm you. We're just trying to keep things safe. Safe slowly turned into convenient. Convenient turned into necessary. Necessary turned into inevitable. There are families that don't need you dead. They just need you invisible. Invisible people don't vote on decisions. They don't sign off on plans. They don't get consulted when assets change hands. Invisible people are easy to speak for. That's the trap. Once you're quiet long enough, others start telling your story for you. They explain your absence. They interpret your silence. They decide what you would have wanted. And the worst part is how reasonable it all sounds. If you protested, you looked defensive. If you insisted, you looked unstable. If you raised your voice, you proved their point. So you shrink just a little, hoping things will reset. They don't. I remember standing in the hallway one morning, tying my boots slowly because my fingers wouldn't cooperate. Lucas walked past me, keys in hand, already on a call. He didn't stop, didn't wait, didn't look back. The door closed. The house went quiet. On the counter was a note. Not angry, not cruel. Running late? We'll update you. Update me. Not ask me. Not include me. That word told me everything. By the time someone treats your presence as optional, your authority is already gone. And once your authority is gone, the next step is paperwork to make it official. That's when I stopped thinking of this as family tension. This was a transition phase. They were making the shift from seeing me as a man with a condition to seeing me as a condition with a man attached. And conditions don't get a vote. They get managed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand my seat back. I watched. Because when people think you've gone quiet out of weakness, they get careless. They stop hiding their intentions, they start assuming your consent, and that assumption is where they always slip. I stood in the doorway that night, the house dim, the warehouse lights glowing faint through the window. I looked at the photo on the wall again. The clean edges, the missing space. They thought the hardest part was done. They thought silence meant surrender. They were wrong. At 1:12, the house was quiet and the warehouse wasn't. The fluorescent light in the back bay made everything look honest. Concrete floor, metal shelves, a folding table with my laptop, a soldering iron, and a stack of shipping manifests Lucas would never read. I didn't go to the living room to fight for my seat in a photo. I went to the place where facts still mattered. In the corner, my old work boots sat by the door, dust-caked. I laced them anyway. Routine is armor when trust breaks. I opened the gate log first. Timestamps, badge scans, truck numbers. In this town, nothing moves without leaving a trace. People think experience is just memory. It isn't. Experience is a map of risks you've already paid for. When you've watched a conveyor motor fail 3 days after it starts making a high whine, you stop hearing noise. You hear a countdown. When you've seen a forklift throw a warning code right before a battery overheats, you stop calling it random. You call it pattern. I had 35 years of patterns in my head. But what I needed now was something no one could argue with. So I started building a system that could speak my language even when my hands shook. I pulled up months of inbound and outbound data, load times, dock assignments, temperature readings in the maintenance room, vibration spikes from the old belt line I'd wired with cheap sensors late at night. Then I added the things that never show up in reports. The driver who always brakes hard at Bay 3 because the approach is uneven. The pallet jack that drifts left because the wheel bearing is worn. The small delay that happens every Friday when the afternoon crew rotates and nobody wants to admit they're tired. That's what experience is. Not a story you tell at dinner, a list of quiet failures you can prevent if you're paying attention. At 2:00 say. I ran the first model. It wasn't fancy. No buzzwords, no glossy dashboard, just a set of thresholds and probabilities, fed by the kind of numbers people ignore until someone gets hurt. The screen flashed a forecast for the next week. One of the cooling fans on the main sorter was running hotter than normal. The vibration signature was drifting. Not enough to trigger an alarm, enough to tell me it would seize. I wrote it down. Date, time, sensor ID, predicted failure window. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I slept. The next morning, at 7:40, Evelyn slid a folder onto the counter like she was handing me mail. Maintenance and safety reports, printed, highlighted, stapled with careful hands. Lucas just wants things documented. She said, "It's for insurance." I didn't argue. I poured coffee. I watched her eyes flick away from mine. That's the ugly trick of paperwork. It sounds responsible. It looks clean. It makes control feel like care. They were writing about me. I was writing about reality. By noon, I was back in the warehouse. The sorter fan started squealing exactly the way my model had predicted. I shut it down before it locked up, replaced it in 20 minutes, logged the repair, took a photo of the thermal reading before and after. No drama, just proof. At 3:15, a truck arrived early, and the dock crew rushed, cutting corners. My system flagged a bottleneck at Bay 2. I moved one pallet stack and rerouted the line. The jam never happened. I saved the timestamp, the gate camera clip, the sensor graph. Every fix became a receipt. And while Lucas and Evelyn were collecting incidents to make me look unsafe, I was collecting outcomes to show I was still the safest person in that building. That night, I sat at my table again, laptop open, hands steady enough. I wasn't building this to impress them. I wasn't building it to beg my way back into the frame. I was building it because I could feel the trap tightening, and I needed something stronger than my own voice. And the question I didn't let myself answer yet was the one that kept the cursor blinking. Who was I saving with this system? The warehouse. The people who depended on it, or myself at 9:18 On a Thursday, a semi rolled up to Dock 4 with its hazard lights blinking like it had something to confess. The driver didn't look at me. He looked past me, toward the office, where Lucas liked to stand in the doorway like a supervisor in a brochure. A man climbed down behind him, clean jeans. New boots, a jacket with a stitched logo from a logistics partner we'd used twice and never trusted. His name was Rick Dalton. Lucas called him a friend. Rick's handshake was dry and quick, like he was touching paperwork, not a person. "We're here to review safety," he said, lifting a clipboard like a badge. No one had scheduled a review. Evelyn was already in the break room, pouring coffee into foam cups, smiling too early. The warehouse smelled like diesel and cardboard, with that sharp metal note that sticks to your hands. The kind of smell you carry home without noticing. Rick walked the floor slowly, stopping at places that didn't need attention, asking questions that sounded harmless. "How often do you log maintenance? Who signs off on incidents? What happens if a belt line stalls?" Lucas answered for me every time. "I watched the rhythm," Rick asked. Lucas spoke. Evelyn nodded. It had the timing of something practiced. At 10:03, Rick stopped near Bay 2 and pointed at a pallet stack. "That shouldn't be there," he said. It had been there for months, labeled, wrapped, stable. Then a forklift backed out too fast. The forks clipped the corner. The stack shifted. One box slid. Nothing broke. No one yelled. But the box hit the concrete with a dull sound that makes people turn even when nothing's wrong. Rick lifted his phone instantly. Lucas didn't check the driver. He checked Rick's angle. I walked over, picked up the box, and set it back. My hands shook, but they held. I waved the operator to park. "Take 5, I said. Rick frowned. "You can't pause operations during a review." I looked at the clipboard. No company header, no permit number, just printed lines and a signature space. Lucas stepped closer. "Dad, it's fine. Let them do their job." That was the moment it changed. Not our job, not the warehouse. Their job. By 11:20, Rick was in the office with Lucas, typing on a laptop I'd never seen. Evelyn brought sandwiches like this was a meeting that mattered. I stood in the doorway and watched Rick upload a file. At 12:07, my phone buzzed. A message from the yard. "They're saying there was an incident report. About you." I didn't answer. I walked to the printer. A fresh document waited in the tray. Maintenance and safety report. Cold words. Clean margins. Near miss. Delayed response. Potential impairment observed. Recommendation temporary suspension pending review. My name was on it. Not as the person who stopped anything, as the reason it almost happened. At the bottom, one line settled everything. External partner witness statement attached. So that was it. This wasn't just family. This was business. And when business gets involved, the town follows. People don't read facts. They read what looks official. By mid-afternoon, calls stopped coming back. One crew lead asked if they should keep their heads down. Lucas walked like he'd been promoted. Rick shook hands with people who weren't his employees. That's how power moves. Quietly. With paper. In fights like this, the first person to lose isn't the one who's wrong. It's the one who loses the right to tell the story. If their report became the truth, I wouldn't just lose the warehouse. I'd lose my voice in every room that mattered. And the people who worked under that roof would learn what silence costs. At 4:11, I went back to my table in the back bay. I opened my own log, timestamps, sensor data, camera clips. I wrote one sentence at the top and underlined it. From this moment on, nobody speaks for me without a record. At 10:42 p.m., the house was dark except for the light under Aaron's door. I hadn't knocked. He hadn't called me in. I only noticed because the hallway clock ticked louder when everything else went quiet. Aaron was never the loud one. He moved through rooms like he didn't want to disturb the air. That night, he was sitting on the floor with his laptop open, back against the bed, one sock half off his heel. He didn't look surprised when I paused at the doorway. "Dad," he said, not looking up. "Can I ask you something without making it weird?" I nodded. I stayed where I was. He turned the screen toward me. An email thread. Subject line capacity review, transition plan. Lucas's name was on it. Rick's too. A third address I didn't recognize. The words were careful, polite, dangerous. Based on recent safety incidents, it said, "We recommend initiating a formal evaluation to transfer operational authority." Aaron scrolled. Dates jumped out at me. Incidents I remembered clearly. A jam that had never happened. A delay blamed on me that I'd logged as weather-related. One line stopped us both. Observed hesitation consistent with declining executive function. Aaron swallowed. "That wasn't true," he said. "Not angry. Precise." He clicked another attachment, a draft schedule. My name faded into parentheses. Lucas's bolded above it. That's when intuition died. This wasn't a feeling. This was a plan. Aaron leaned back, rubbing his face. "I thought I was imagining things." He said, "Mom kept saying it was about insurance. Lucas said it was just paperwork." He laughed once. Quiet. "But this email, this was written before the incident, before the forklift, before anything." He looked at me then. Really looked. "They decided first," he said. Then they went looking for reasons. I didn't sit down. I didn't touch his shoulder. I asked one question. "Can you keep your head clear?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" "This only works if you don't rush," I said. "No speeches, no confrontations, just accuracy." He nodded slowly. "I can do that." The next morning. At 6:18, Aaron forwarded the thread to a personal account. He didn't flag it, didn't reply. He saved the metadata, took screenshots with timestamps visible, renamed the files twice. At 9:02, he pulled camera footage from the week of the alleged incident. He didn't download the whole thing, just the 2 minutes before and the 5 after. At 11:47, he photographed the whiteboard in the office, the one Lucas erased every Friday. You could still see the indentation of old notes if you tilted the light. Transfer, review, Rick, confirm. At 2:30, he emailed me one sentence. I think they changed the order. That night, we stood in the garage, the smell of oil thick between us. I was tightening a bolt that didn't need tightening. Aaron watched my hands. Then he looked away. "I don't want to pick sides," he said. "I'm not asking you to," I said. He nodded. "I just don't want to lie." That was enough. Good people don't usually blow whistles. They archive, they remember, they keep copies. They do small things that don't feel heroic until someone needs them. Over the next 3 days, Aaron became invisible in the best way. He listened. He didn't argue. He let Lucas explain things twice. Every time someone said after the incident, Aaron checked the date. Every time someone said as we discussed, he checked the inbox. On Thursday, at 8:55 p.m, he brought me a folder. Physical. Printed. Labeled by hand. Inside were emails, logs, photos, and one timeline that ran down the center of the page. Plan on the left, incidents on the right. They didn't line up. I flipped through slowly. When I reached the end, I closed it. Aaron waited. He didn't ask if I was okay. He asked the only question that mattered. What happens next? I met his eyes. That depends, I said, on whether you're willing to stay calm when this gets loud. He didn't hesitate. I am. I nodded once. Then I said it. All right. Then we go all the way. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and black coffee. No diplomas on the wall, no framed victories. Just a clock that ran 5 minutes fast and a legal pad already filled when I sat down. Mr. Harlan didn't ask how I was holding up. He asked what I could prove. I slid the folder across his desk. Aaron's work, my logs, the incident timeline split clean down the middle. He didn't react. He flipped pages, checked dates, made small pencil marks like he was correcting math. After a while, he looked up. Stop explaining, he said. Start measuring. That was it. No pep talk, no sympathy. He told me something I hadn't heard from anyone else. In these cases, the first person who argues loses. The first person who documents wins. He tapped the folder. This is a start, but it's not enough. The next week turned quiet in a way that felt deliberate. On Tuesday at 8:30, I sat in a windowless clinic with a clipboard on my lap and a pen that clicked too loudly. The evaluation wasn't about my hands. No one asked me to lift anything. No one watched me walk. They asked me to sort patterns, recall sequences, explain how I'd solve problems I'd never seen before. I took my time. I didn't rush answers to prove anything. I let the clock run. At 11:12, the examiner stopped me. You're separating variables, she said. Not impressed. Just accurate. That's how I work, I said. She nodded and wrote something down. 3 days later, the report arrived, sealed, neutral language, no drama, cognitive function intact, processing deliberate, decision-making consistent. It didn't praise me. It cleared me. That mattered more. At the same time, back at the warehouse, I started logging everything like I expected to be audited tomorrow. Not feelings, numbers, temperature swings, load times, vibration thresholds, maintenance gaps no one had bothered to chart before. Every adjustment got a timestamp. Every test run had a baseline and a result. When something failed, I didn't fix it quietly. I documented the failure, then the fix, then the difference. By Friday, the system was predicting small faults hours before alarms would have caught them. By Monday, it was days. I didn't announce it. I let it run. At night, in the basement, the hum of the server replaced the noise in my head. The LED lights blinked steady, familiar, honest. I trusted machines more than conversations at that point. One afternoon, Aaron came down with 2 mugs of coffee. He set one next to my keyboard without a word. You okay? He asked. I'm accurate, I said. He smiled once, then watched the screen. You know, he said, they keep saying you're confused. I scrolled through the logs. Confusion doesn't scale like this, I said. He nodded. On Thursday at 4:05 p.m., Mr. Harlan emailed. Now we wait. Waiting wasn't passive. It meant no confrontations, no correcting stories, no defending myself at dinner. It meant letting them keep talking while the paperwork grew heavier. Every accusation they floated, I matched with a document. Every suggestion of risk, I countered with a test result. I stopped wondering if I was overreacting. That was the quiet gift of evidence. When you can point to a date, a measurement, a signature, you stop questioning your own memory. You stop replaying conversations at night. You stop asking yourself if maybe you really are the problem. On Sunday morning, I lined everything up on the workbench, reports, logs, the evaluation envelope still sealed, bread toasted in the kitchen. The clock over the sink ticked loud. I didn't feel angry. I felt ready. Because the truth is, proof isn't just for courtrooms. It's for the moment when someone looks at you and says, "Are you sure?" And you don't have to answer out loud. You just open the folder. I didn't win by hiding everything. I won by leaving one thing slightly out of place. It happened on a Thursday night, just after 9. The warehouse was quiet in that way that only comes after people stop pretending to work. The lights over aisle 3 flickered. The server hummed steady. I exported a draft forecast. Not the final version. Not the one with the corrected parameters and the updated vibration thresholds. An earlier model, clean enough to look professional, incomplete enough to raise eyebrows. I labeled it wrong on purpose, not a lie, just unfinished. Then I saved it where I knew it would be found. By Friday morning, it was already moving. Lucas didn't come to me. He never did anymore. He went straight to his friend, the logistics partner who'd been circling for months, pretending concern while waiting for an opening. The kind of man who says risk mitigation when he means control. By noon, emails started flying. Not to me. Around me. At 2:14 p.m., my phone buzzed with a calendar update I hadn't accepted. Emergency review, safety exposure, attendance mandatory. I stayed at my desk. At 3:02, Aaron walked in. Pale. "They're using your forecast," he said. "The early one," I nodded. "They think it proves you're reckless," he added. I saved my work and shut down the monitor. At 4:40 p.m., Lucas signed the contract. Not carefully, not slowly, hungry. It was framed as a rescue agreement. Temporary management transfer. Safeguard operations until risks were addressed. On paper, it sounded reasonable. In sequence, it was fatal. Because buried in the timing was the mistake. The clause Mr. Harlan had circled weeks ago. Authority assumed before verification. Control executed before independent review. Intent documented by acceleration. They didn't wait for my response. They didn't wait for the audit. They moved first. And in doing so, they wrote the story for me. That night, I stood in the basement with the lights off, watching the server LEDs blink through the dark. Green, steady, honest. The final forecast sat finished on my screen. Corrected, logged, time-stamped. I didn't send it. Not yet. At 6:07 m, the next morning, the town woke up to whispers. Emails forwarded, texts screenshotted. The phrase near miss got used a lot. People started saying my name the way they say weather, like it's dangerous if ignored. I made coffee, burnt the toast, watched the clock tick past 7. By the time Lucas called, I was already dressed. "Why would you run a system like that?" he asked. Not yelling. Confident. "I didn't," I said. Silence. "The version you saw," I added, "wasn't live." He laughed once. "Short. That's not what the paperwork shows." "I know," I said, because that was the point. At 10:30, Mr. Harlan emailed one word. Perfect. The contract Lucas signed referenced the wrong data set. Dated it, elevated it, treated it as operational. In doing so, he bypassed the safeguards he claimed to care about. He didn't just question my competence. He asserted control without cause. Legally, that mattered. At noon, Aaron printed everything. The draft, the final, the access logs, the timestamps that showed who downloaded what and when. The difference between mistake and manipulation is sequence, and greed always rushes sequence. By 3 p.m., the narrative had shifted. Not publicly. Quietly. Phone calls stopped being aggressive. They became careful. People started asking questions they hadn't bothered with before. Did he really sign before verification? Why wasn't there an independent review? Who benefits from the timing? I didn't answer any of them. I let the documents speak. That evening, I stood in the foyer and watched Lucas pace the living room. Phone pressed to his ear, voice low, controlled, cracking. He never looked at me. He didn't have to. He'd already stepped into the trap he thought he was setting. I didn't win by shouting, or correcting him in real time, or proving I was smarter. I won by understanding something simple. When someone is desperate to prove you're dangerous, they stop being careful. They move fast. They cut corners. They sign things they shouldn't. All you have to do is let them, and make sure the clock is running. I didn't post anything online. No thread, no statement, no late-night explanation looking for sympathy. I waited for the meeting. Tuesday, 9:00. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner. A long table, legal pads stacked neatly, a clock that ticked louder than it should. This was the right stage. Third parties present, counsel on both sides, documents already circulated. Nothing dramatic allowed to happen here, which is exactly why it worked. Lucas sat 2 seats down from me, jacket still on. He kept checking his phone like he was waiting for backup. My wife didn't look at me at all. She aligned her papers twice, then once more. Mr. Harlan arrived last. No rush, no small talk. He nodded at me once. That was the signal. We didn't start with accusations. We started with dates. I stood up and turned on the projector. One screen, white background, black text, a timeline. On the left, their reports, maintenance logs, safety memos, emails flagged urgent. On the right, my system logs, sensor installs, calibration dates, test results, verification stamps, same days, same weeks, different realities. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain how it felt. I pointed. This report, I said, tapping the screen, was filed on March 3rd at 4:18 p.m. Pause. This sensor anomaly, I continued, was detected March 1st at 2:02 a.m., automatically corrected within 40 seconds. I clicked. A graph appeared, flat where it should be flat, a spike where it mattered, a timestamp nobody could argue with. I didn't look at Lucas. I let the room do it for me. One of the consultants leaned forward. Not interested yet. Curious. I moved on. Another date. Another comparison. Their language stayed vague. Potential risk. Observed instability. Recommended oversight. Mine didn't. Temperature variance. Load distribution. Vibration frequency. Corrective action logged. Each slide ended the same way. Verified, signed, archived. By the 5th slide, the clock stopped being loud. Mr. Harlan spoke for the first time. Then, before we proceed, he said, calm. I'd like the independent reviewer to confirm the validation process. A woman at the end of the table nodded and opened her folder. She didn't know me. She didn't care about my family. That was the point. She confirmed the audit trail, the access logs, the fact that the system had been live and performing within tolerance the entire period in question. Quiet spread through the room, not shock, recognition. The story they'd been telling couldn't survive contact with consistency. Lucas finally spoke. So you're saying there was no danger, he asked. I didn't answer. The consultant did. No. He said, he's saying the danger was misrepresented. That word hung there. Misrepresented. Not emotional, not cruel, just accurate. I advanced to the final slide. The contract? The one Lucas had signed. The clause he'd rushed past. Authority assumed prior to verification. Execution before review. Mr. Harlan didn't read it aloud. He didn't have to. Everyone in that room understood what it meant. This wasn't concern. This was a power grab with a paper trail. I finally spoke again. Everything I've shown you, I said, was available before that signature. I looked directly at Lucas then. You didn't ask for it. He opened his mouth, closed it, adjusted his watch. The realization didn't come with shouting. It came with silence, the kind where people stop pretending there's another explanation coming. That's when I understood something I wish I'd learned earlier. Public doesn't mean loud. Public means undeniable. When there are dates, signatures, and witnesses, the story no longer belongs to whoever talks the fastest. It belongs to the record. By the time the meeting ended, no one was asking if I was okay. They were asking procedural questions: how authority would be restored, how oversight would be restructured, how decisions would be reviewed going forward. Power had already shifted, quietly, permanently. As we stood to leave, my wife finally looked at me, not angry, not relieved, cornered. There was nowhere left to hide the story she'd helped build. No social explanation would fix this. No family meeting would erase it. Paper doesn't forget. Neither do timestamps. I packed my folder slowly, put my pen back in its case, buttoned my coat. Lucas left without saying goodbye. I didn't watch him go. I watched the consultant collect the documents. Once the truth is filed, it doesn't need you to defend it anymore. That's the moment people fear, not exposure, finality. I didn't ask for apologies. Not in the hallway, not afterward, not in private messages that tried to sound careful. I asked for terms. We met again 2 days later. Smaller room. No projector this time. Just folders, water glasses, and a legal pad in front of me with 4 lines written cleanly. I read them out loud. First, all attempts to transfer or restrict operational control end immediately. Every document already drafted gets withdrawn, no revisions, no temporary authority. Second, no one interferes with the logistics assets again, not through reports, not through consultants, not through concern disguised as procedure. Third, Aaron is off limits. No retaliation, no pressure, no rewriting his role in this story. Fourth, communication changes, scheduled, documented, boundaries respected, no surprise meetings, no late-night calls framed as worry. I finished reading and slid the pad across the table. No anger in my voice, no relief either, just clarity. My wife asked if this meant I was cutting them out. I shook my head once. This means I'm not giving control back. I said, there's a difference people pretend not to understand. Forgiveness isn't reversal. It's pause. It's choosing not to escalate, not choosing to forget. I wasn't there to punish anyone. Courts handle punishment. Time handles regret. I was there to make sure the same hands never reached for the same levers again. Lucas tried to negotiate, framed it as healing, used words like unity and moving forward. I waited until he finished. Then I asked one question. Which part of this would you trust, if the roles were reversed? He didn't answer. That was enough. Mr. Harlan wrote quietly the entire time. When I nodded, he spoke. These terms are reasonable, he said. They're precise. And they close the risk. Risk, not drama, not betrayal, risk. That word landed harder than any accusation. Signatures followed, one by one. Slow, careful. The sound of pen on paper was the loudest thing in the room. When it was done, no one hugged, no one cried. We stood. Chairs slid back. People gathered their coats. Outside, the afternoon sun sat low over the parking lot. Long shadows, quiet wind. Aaron walked beside me without speaking. At my truck, he finally asked if I was okay. I looked at him. Really looked. I am, I said, Because this ends here. That's the part people miss. Justice doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like limits that hold. You can forgive someone and still lock the door they tried to open. You can love people and refuse to let them steer your life. Standing your ground doesn't require violence. It requires precision. Clear lines, clear records, clear consequences. I drove home alone. The warehouse lights came on automatically as I pulled in. Systems running, logs clean. Nothing dramatic waited for me there. And that was the victory. Peace doesn't come from winning arguments. It comes from knowing the boundary will hold tomorrow, even when you're not watching. That night, I filed every signed page into the cabinet behind my desk. Top drawer? Labeled? Dated? Not because I planned to use it again. Because knowing it was there let me sleep. Evidence isn't just for courtrooms. It's for the moments when doubt creeps in and asks if you imagined everything. I didn't. The lines were real, the signatures were real. And tomorrow, when someone tried to soften them with memory or emotion, the paper would still say no. That's how it ends, not with noise, with structure, with restraint, with a boundary so solid it doesn't need defending ever again, by anyone involved, ever. I didn't come out of this bitter. I came out precise. That's the difference. When people hear stories like this, they expect a hard turn. A man who cuts everyone off, someone who burns bridges and calls it strength. That's not what happened. What changed wasn't my heart, it was my awareness. So if you're watching this and something feels familiar, if you've ever felt managed instead of loved, there are 3 things I want you to remember. Not slogans, not motivation. 3 practical rules that protect you when emotion is used as leverage. First, separate feelings from records. If someone is truly concerned, they won't be afraid of facts. They won't resist timelines. They won't mind things being written down. The moment a conversation stays emotional but avoids documentation, you're not in a discussion. You're in a setup. Don't argue when you don't have evidence. Arguing only helps the person who plans to rewrite what was said later. Slow down. Write things down. Save the email. Log the date. You're not being paranoid. You're being accurate. Second, listen to the language, not the tone. "I'm just worried about you" is not the same as "I need control over your decisions." "We're doing this for your safety" is not the same as "you agreed to give up authority." People hide intentions in soft words because soft words leave fewer fingerprints. Stop responding to how something sounds. Respond to what it does. Ask one question every time. What changes if I say yes? If the answer is less autonomy, fewer options, or someone else holding the keys, pay attention. Concern that costs you your agency isn't care, it's management. Third, if it ever needs to be public, choose the right stage. Public doesn't mean loud. It doesn't mean social media. It doesn't mean dragging people in front of an audience. Public means documented, witnessed, verifiable, right people, right papers, right timing. The truth doesn't need drama to win. It needs structure. When you present facts in the correct setting, manipulation collapses on its own because it can't survive consistency. That's the part no one tells you. Families that operate on control don't fear weakness. They fear clarity. They're comfortable when you're emotional, when you're confused, when you doubt yourself. They get nervous when you're calm, when you start measuring instead of reacting, when you stop asking for permission and start keeping records. That shift doesn't make you cruel. It makes you difficult to manipulate. If you're still here, I want you to do one thing. Think about a moment when you felt erased, overruled, spoken for, not yelled at, not hit, just quietly managed. If you're willing, share that experience in the comments. You're not alone in it, even if it felt lonely at the time. And if this story gave you language for something you couldn't name before, save it. You might need it later. Sometimes the most important protection isn't strength, it's awareness. And once you see the pattern clearly, it can never run the same way again.